Hello, and thank you for joining us today in our study of the book of Psalms. Today we're in Psalm 31, and this Psalm of David is going to be a little bit longer than many of those that we've looked at to this point. And yet at the same time, it's partly because of the subject matter that it covers. This is, in many ways, a psalm of pain and grief for things that David is dealing with. Now, there's going to be instances throughout the psalm where David admits that he's sinned, that he's fallen short, that he has failed to do things that he should have. And yet, those aren't necessarily the reasons why his pain and his suffering is coming upon him. But in the midst of it all, he is going to be looking to God for help. So let's go through and read the verses of Psalm 31. Beginning in verse 1, here's what we find. In you, O Lord, I put my trust. Let me never be ashamed. Deliver me in your righteousness. Bow down your ear to me. Deliver me speedily. Be my rock of refuge, a fortress of defense to save me. For you are my rock and my fortress. Therefore, for your name's sake, lead me and guide me. Pull me out of the net which they have secretly laid for me. For you are my strength. Into your hand I commit my spirit. You have redeemed me, O Lord God of truth. I have hated those who regard useless idols, but I trust in the Lord. I will be glad and rejoice in your mercy, for you have considered my trouble. You have known my soul in adversities, and have not shut me up into the hand of the enemy. You have set my feet in a wide place. Have mercy on me, O Lord, for I am in trouble. My eye wastes away with grief, yes, my soul and my body. For my life is spent with grief, and my years with sighing. My strength fails because of my iniquity, and my bones waste away. I am a reproach among all my enemies, but especially among my neighbors, and am repulsive to my acquaintances. Those who see me outside flee from me. I am forgotten like a dead man, out of mind. I am like a broken vessel, for I hear the slander of many. Fear is on every side. While they take counsel together against me, they scheme to take away my life. But as for me, I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hand. Deliver me from the hand of my enemies, and from those who persecute me. Make your face shine upon your servant. Save me for your mercy's sake. Do not let me be ashamed, O Lord, for I have called upon you. Let the wicked be ashamed. Let them be silent in the grave. Let the lying lips be put to silence, which speak insolent things proudly and contemptuously against the righteous. Oh, how great is your goodness, which you have laid up for those who fear you, which you have prepared for those who trust in you in the presence of the sons of men. You shall hide them in the secret place of your presence from the plots of man. You shall keep them secretly in a pavilion from the strife of tongues. Blessed be the Lord, for he has shown me his marvelous kindness in a strong city. For I said in my haste, I am cut off before your eyes. Nevertheless you heard the voice of my supplications when I cried out to you. Oh, love the Lord, all you his saints. For the Lord preserves the faithful, and fully repays the proud person. Be of good courage, and he shall strengthen your heart, all you who hope in the Lord. There are several things here in this psalm that we could spend a great deal of time examining and pointing out. But let's just look at a couple of things quickly about what's found in this psalm. First of all, at the beginning of the psalm, David makes this statement. He says, into your hand I commit my spirit. Now, oftentimes this particular phrase is used at the cusp of death or even after death has occurred. It is uttered over the body of one who has died. And yet at the same time, David here is still very much among the living, and there's no sense that David is about to die, even though he is afraid and he fears for his life. But David is using this phrase to say, God, you are in control. Into your hands, into your trust, I commit my spirit. In other words, whatever happens to me, I know that it will be your will because you hold my spirit in your hands and you have redeemed me, O Lord God of truth. There is something to be said for David being willing to trust God enough to fully and completely put himself in God's hands. And that's exactly what we're seeing here in Psalm 31. The second thing I want us to notice comes from verses 9 and following, where David is going to ask God for mercy. But in the midst of it, he says, My eye wastes away with grief, yes, my body and my soul. For my life is spent with grief, and my years with sighing. My strength fails because of my iniquity, and my bones waste away. I am a reproach among all my enemies, but especially among my neighbors, and am repulsive to my acquaintances. Those who see me outside flee from me. Here you have a picture of dealing with absolute rejection. His neighbors are against him. Those who see him outside run away from him. His enemies are ones who consider him a reproach. And it grieves him greatly. You know, when you go back to David's days with Saul, we don't necessarily have a setting for Psalm 31 in the exact timeline of David's life, but it really seems to fit in many ways with the days in which David is running from King Saul. David hasn't done anything to Saul. David has not tried to rise up against Saul, and he refrains from seeking to harm Saul. And yet Saul is going to constantly come after David, and everywhere David turns is a potential enemy because it's a potential ally of Saul, who is the king of Israel. David here is mourning the fact that he has nowhere to go. He has no one in whom he can trust necessarily. He is constantly surrounded with enemies that he doesn't want, as far as that goes. And it's grieving him greatly. He is in great distress because of it. You know, sometimes life isn't fair. And sometimes we are put in positions that aren't of our own making and aren't because we've inherently done something to deserve it. And yet, at the same time, we still have to deal with those issues. David is seeking to deal with it here by turning to the Lord. The last thing I want us to notice, in the same confines of what we've been discussing, is down at the end of the psalm in verse 22. David makes the statement, he says, For I said in my haste, I am cut off from before your eyes. Nevertheless, you heard the voice of my supplications when I cried out to you. David says, I said this in my haste. Or in other words, I was so overcome with what was going on, I spoke out of turn is really the idea. I said something I didn't mean when I said I am cut off from before your eyes. In other words, I'm about to die is the idea. Sometimes we say things in the heat of the moment, in the midst of the situation, that we later regret having said, or maybe it's the tenor or the tone with which it is said. David here has one of those occasions. He spoke to God in pain and in worry and in grief and in trouble, and he said something in the midst of all of that he regrets having said. And yet, David says, you still heard the voice of my supplication when I cried out to you. But it doesn't mean that David refuses to acknowledge the wrong that he did in what he said and how he said it. We will all have times over the course of our life where we will say things in haste that we later wish we hadn't. But we also have to be willing to admit when those things occur and to strive to make it right. These are some of the things that I've noticed in Psalm 31. I hope that they have been beneficial to you. The next time, we'll come back and we'll look at Psalm 32. But until then, have a great day.